Hello, my name is Eve Moran and I am an Attainment Advisor working in Education Scotland as part of the Scottish Attainment Challenge. I am joined by my colleagues and fellow Attainment Advisors Callum McFarlane and Karen Pride. This is a pre-recorded version of an input that was delivered as part of a live webinar to practitioners on the 24th of February 2021 on data and the Poverty Related Attainment Gap.
Thank you, Eve. Let's start by sharing the aims of today's session. Through the course of this presentation, we will consider the poverty-related attainment gap and why we need to close it, how we measure the poverty-related attainment gap, the role of data in closing the poverty-related attainment gap, the types of data that you might use and how and why these should be intersected. We'll explore some practical classroom examples, and finally, the importance of creating a positive data culture. It's important to begin by reminding ourselves about what we mean by the poverty-related attainment gap and why we need to play our part in closing it. The quote that you see on the screen gives an explanation as defined by Education Scotland. Attainment is measurable progress made by children and young people in the development of the skills, knowledge and attributes they will need to succeed in life, learning and work. The quote explains that many learners from the most deprived communities are at greater risk of poorer educational outcomes than those from the least deprived areas. This difference is referred to as the attainment gap. Some of you will work in settings with a high number of families living in areas of deprivation, but it's important to remember that poverty is present in all of our communities. Family circumstances can change, and anyone can suddenly be impacted by poverty. We know that the COVID-19 pandemic has affected many and has had a disproportionate impact on single parents and low-income households. We also know that there are specific groups of children and young people most likely to be affected by the poverty-related gap during school years, including care experienced young people, gypsy travellers, and white Scottish or white British boys. On the slide are some examples taken from the Robertson Trust Review. It is clear that the attainment gap is present throughout each stage of a learner's education. Children and young people from the most deprived communities are at greater risk of displaying developmental concerns as infants. They are more likely to leave school with less qualifications than their peers, and they may be less successful in securing a positive destination on leaving school. Alongside other agencies and communities, education and educational practitioners have a role to play in closing this gap and supporting our children and young people to secure the best possible outcomes. Eve will now go on to consider the role that data has to play in this process.
Thank you, Karen. In measuring the poverty-related attainment gap, we first need to consider how we measure or identify learners that may be affected by poverty. The Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation, often shortened to SIMD, is a relative measure of deprivation across small areas of Scotland called data zones. If an area is identified as deprived, this can be connected to people having a low income, but it can also mean there are fewer resources or opportunities available. SIMD looks at the extent to which an area is deprived across 7 domains. These are income, employment, education, health, access to services, crime and housing. When looking at school data, you will often hear people refer to the most disadvantaged learners living in SIMD deciles 1 and 2 or SIMD quintile 1. Another commonly used measure of learners who may be affected by poverty are those in receipt of free school meals, although these are not always taken up by every family who is entitled. Both of these measures are good indicators of learners and families that may be affected by poverty, but they may not capture everyone. Some local authorities use additional measures, and schools also rely on sensitively gathered local intelligence and information. We have discussed measures of poverty. Now let's consider attainment. At a national level, we would measure the poverty-related attainment gap against key priorities in the National Improvement Framework, often referred to as the NIF. This is designed to help deliver the twin aims of excellence and equity in education and serves as a single definitive plan for securing educational improvement. The NIF is informed by evidence gathered under each key priority in the NIF Interactive Evidence Report. One of the priorities uses SIMD information to look at the attainment gap between the most and least deprived learners across the early years, broad general education, senior phase and looked after children. Tools such as the Broad General Education Benchmarking Tool and Insight provide further information for local authorities and school leaders on the achievement of learners. Schools and authorities are able to use these to compare the attainment of learners from different socioeconomic backgrounds and can choose to look at virtual comparator schools or authorities with similar contexts. Locally, authorities may have developed their own tracking and monitoring systems. They may centrally collect information from schools on the attainment and achievement of learners at all stages. This may be used to identify authority-wide patterns and inform improvement planning, professional learning packages or target setting. Within school, leaders will consider national and local data alongside their whole school information. Some schools will adopt local authority packages, whilst others have developed their own systems of tracking. They might look at the attainment gap in different subjects or year groups, at a single point or over time. They are likely to intersect pastoral data such as learner engagement and attendance alongside academic information. In the classroom, practitioners will be aware of whole school patterns and areas for improvement. They will be aware of key groups, including pupils who may be affected by poverty, and identify and plan to address any gaps in learning. It is the work that is done by practitioners in the classroom to understand and close the attainment gap that will arguably make one of the biggest difference to children and young people. When considering the specific role of data, it may help to view it as a tool. In order to close gaps for learners affected by poverty, practitioners will need to adopt a rigorous and diagnostic approach. If used successfully, data will help practitioners to ask questions and better understand learner needs, identify gaps for groups and individual learners, use this information to plan for accelerated progress through universal or targeted approaches, track whether changes are having an impact, and adjust approaches to improve outcomes as required, and evaluate learner progress over time and tell an improvement story. Callum will now talk about different types of data and how it may be intersected.
Thank you, Eve. There are two types of data, quantitative and qualitative. Typically, practitioners are more comfortable with quantitative data. Quantitative data represents something that is measured as a number. It can be used to show progress from a baseline against a target or comparator and at a fixed point or over time. Examples of quantitative data can include NIF measures, SQ results, and attendance percentages. This can be really helpful in measuring the progress and overall impact of an improvement project. When considering quantitative data, it is important to ensure that data is accurate, the sample size is noted to ensure it is statistically significant, and any interpretation is applied within a wider context. Qualitative data includes descriptions, observations, stories, and opinions. Stories and feedback give rich qualitative data. They are a very powerful way of finding out where opportunities for improvement lie, understanding and describing the impact of improvements. Case studies can be often a powerful way to demonstrate improvement and give depth to quantitative findings. It is possible to convert stories and feedback to quantitative data. For example, asking people to express an opinion on a statement using a rating scale. Measures of attitude, satisfaction and experiences are commonly collected this way. When considering qualitative data, it is important to ensure that any stories or feedback are used alongside quantitative measures in order to demonstrate or plan for improvement. In order to close the poverty-related attainment gap for groups or individuals, it is likely that practitioners will need to consider a wide range of data sources. Looking at multiple measures or intersecting data can be helpful in understanding the complete spectrum of need. This can be incorporated into school tracking and monitoring approaches. This diagram helpfully groups data under different headings and shows how they may be intersected or considered alongside each other. Demographic data explores learner characteristics. The Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation, free meal entitlement, attendance, gender, and English as an additional language are all examples of demographic data. Examples of pupil learning data include summative assessment, taken at a point in time, such as SNSAs, and everyday formative assessment, such as feedback and classroom observation. School processes include quality assurance approaches, the structure of the school day, and curricular pathways. Finally, the views of stakeholders such as practitioners, learners, parents, and partners provide perception data. These can be gathered through consultations, questionnaires, and discussion groups. In simple terms, there are lots of types of data. Some learners affected by poverty have attainment gaps that can be best understood using a combination of data in order to clearly identify the root cause and plan for improvement. Karen is now going to explain why you might intersect data.
Attainment or pupil learning data is one output or outcome of learning. It is important to understand why other sources of data, such as demographic, perception, and school process, are equally important and add value. For example, reviewing attendance helps to identify trends in pupil absence. If a pupil were to miss school for 1 day a week, each week, for the whole of their school life, the impact on learning would be significant. A learner who misses 1 day a week for the 13 years they attend school would miss over 2.5 years of schooling. Poor attendance has been linked to lower levels of attainment, peer relationships, emotional and behavioural difficulties, and can impact employment opportunities. How would this impact on the attainment of a learner who is from a disadvantaged background? What might you be able to do to increase attendance? Practitioners might think about relationships, an enticing curriculum, and working with the family and pastoral support staff to understand and support reasons for poor attendance. Leaders adopt quality improvement approaches. This process data encourages classroom practitioners to reflect upon their own practice. High quality learning and teaching can make a significant difference to the progress of pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds. Research from the Sutton Trust suggests that highly effective teaching could make a difference equivalent to 1 year of learning. When you then consider the impact of improving attendance and providing high quality learning and teaching, the impact you can make as practitioners on closing the gap can be transformational. What about the influence of other data, such as engagement and health and well-being? How does this affect learning and outcomes? Drilling down and understanding the impact that each of these areas can have on improving performance is crucial in closing the gap. I'll now hand over to Callum, who will talk us through intersecting data in a real-life context.
Thank you, Karen. Intersecting data using more than one source of information enhances our understanding and helps us to appreciate the bigger picture. As the slide suggests, sometimes, when given the option, it is convenient for people to stick with a familiar or reassuring lie, rather than a more inconvenient or uncomfortable truth. Children and young people affected by poverty need practitioners to be open-minded, diagnostic, and ready to use a range of data to ask questions leading to answers that allow gaps to be closed. Do you consciously or unconsciously do this when thinking about data? A reassuring lie might be sticking to favoured interventions, even though progress is slow, or perhaps focusing on attendance figures rather than the role, relationships, and an engaging curriculum may have to play. Finally, when thinking about intersecting data, it may help to give a real-life example. True story. The date was 8th of July 2014. Brazil met Germany in the World Cup semi-final. As you can see, Brazil had more possession, more shots on goal, and on target, but how did the game end? Remarkably, if you never watched the game and just heard these statistics or pieces of data that are on the slide, you'd be led to believe that Brazil were victorious. But in fact, Germany won 7-1 that day. It is important that we are data informed and not data driven. It is vital that we do not take data at face value or surface level. Data should lead to inquiry and evoke further questioning. If we apply this analogy to a school context and think about data like peeling an onion, you might find that each layer brings a new question before you get to the core. It may appear that on the surface, whole school literacy is an issue, but if you look a little deeper, you may find that reading is the focus. Look again, and it is reading at primary 1, 2 and 3. Unpicking the group data, it then appears to be mostly girls. And then you find it is girls who are affected by poverty. Checking the attendance data finally reveals that the majority of these learners have low attendance rates, which is affecting their reading levels as they're consistently missing phonics and literacy. Once we've discovered the root cause, we can then plan appropriately, ensuring that the outcomes and measures we want to use to inform our next steps are absolutely clear. Building on from what we've discussed so far, Eve is now going to talk us through a practical example of using data to close the poverty-related attainment gap in classroom.
In this primary-based example, a P6 teacher attends a staff meeting. The head teacher shares some whole school data, which seems to indicate that there is a large gap in the reading attainment of learners living in the most disadvantaged areas. There are some whole school initiatives planned to address this, but staff are also asked to look at their own data and analyse if and why this is the case in their class. The P6 teacher takes a look at their class level information. An initial analysis indicates that attainment is lower in reading for a group of SIMD 1 and 2 boys, and that this is not narrowing over time. The teacher needs to unpeel the layers to find out why these learners are not making progress in reading. He considers various additional sources of quantitative and qualitative data. Attendance data shows that the boys' attendance is good, which is positive and means that they will be present to benefit from a change in approach or support. Looking at reading records and assessments, it is clear there is an issue with comprehension. The boys find it difficult to retrieve answers quickly and lack skills such as skimming and scanning or tracking as they read. They also find it difficult to infer from the text. Learner engagement is something that is key. Talking to the boys reveals that they have a very negative self-image of themselves as readers, and they are uninterested in many of the texts that have been covered. Longer texts seem to be more intimidating for them. Finally, the teacher reflects on his own practice and has discussions with colleagues about their own approaches to reading. He realises that he has not been explicitly modelling reading strategies and that he often gives the most challenging group to his support assistant rather than taking these children for reading sessions himself. This has made it more difficult to keep track of need and progress for this group. This deeper analysis of different sources of data allows the teacher to plan for improvement using a mixture of universal and targeted approaches. He ensures that he has clear aims, a timeline, actions, and that measures of impact are built in from the start. He plans to track progress throughout as well as at the end so that he can make adjustments if necessary. The plan is shared and discussed with his support assistant and year group partner. A child-friendly version is also shared with learners and their families. After these interventions and approaches have taken place, the teacher will use the data to reflect and evaluate on the progress made. Learners may have closed the gap fully, partially, or to a lesser extent. The teacher may need to continue with this approach for a longer period, make adjustments, or try something new. Where an approach has been particularly successful, the evidence may be shared with colleagues and upscaled around school.
Thank you. That was really interesting, Eve. I can see where this approach would be useful in secondary schools. This has made me think about another example that complements this approach, but at a whole school level. At secondary, school leaders looked at research on improving literacy levels. They discovered that improving reading would improve literacy levels across all subjects. Also, the data in the school indicated that there was a greater attainment gap in reading. The school's approach was to provide early intervention and put in place a system that increased the reading age in line with a learner's chronological age. Work began with partner primary schools. This influenced a change in the timetable for the secondary school. The school altered the purpose of registration and used 5 minutes from periods 1 and 2 to create a 20-minute daily reading session. Staff were supported through professional learning and pupils were targeted accordingly. As a result, the school have evidence that there has been an impact on the systematic approach, which is informed by a range of data. Intelligence indicates that there is increasing reading age of all learners. This has included an acceleration in the reading ages of learners identified as living in SMD 1 and 2. Karen will now piece together all of the elements and discuss the importance of practitioners helping to build a positive data culture in school.
Thank you, Callum. To promote a culture of data use, there should be clear expectations set with school staff, partners, children and parents to encourage data use in multiple areas of the school system. Developing a clear communication plan will support collaboration and partnerships. Class teachers can contribute through collaboration with other staff, learners and parents. It's important to ensure that the data collected can be accessed easily and analysed efficiently. It is helpful if data is aligned with larger goals such as school improvement planning and professional learning. Class teachers might want to consider their own record keeping and ask, is it easily accessible and clear? Collaboration supports teachers to make decisions and increases collective understanding and accountability. In a positive data culture, teachers will have clearly defined roles, developing mutual and collective responsibility. As a class teacher, developing reflective and transparent practice, being open to discussions, and taking part in regular conversations about data will increase confidence and trust. It's important to note that data can become overwhelming. In positive data cultures, the first question practitioners might ask is not, what data do we need to collect, but rather consider asking, what do we want data for? What information will it provide? What questions will it answer? The answer to these questions will be different for every school and will depend on factors such as the ethos and priorities of the school, learner demographic, staff capacity, budgets, size and location. Collect once, use many times should be a guiding principle. Schools will often find that different people can use the same data in different ways for different purposes. Using the same source data for different analyses improves reliability and comparability. It's important to highlight that data is not a panacea. Better and effective use of data offers a world of opportunities, but it will not be a cure for all of the challenges faced by teachers. Data is not a replacement for great teaching. Data is not the only way of making decisions. It's an aid for practitioners to make more informed decisions. Data means less if we do not ask the right questions of it. And data is not something that should be used in isolation of other data or a local context. The quote provided on screen, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast," highlights that no matter how strong your knowledge of data, its efficacy and outcomes for learners are stronger with a positive data culture. Thank you for joining us. We hope that you found the information useful. We would like to leave you with a resource that might prompt further reflection around data and the poverty-related attainment gap. The Scottish Attainment Challenge self-evaluation resource was created to assist schools with their work in relation to achieving equity and has been updated for the current context. It includes a summary of highly effective practice in different areas and challenge questions that may aid practitioner reflection as you continue to develop your understanding of data to close the poverty-related attainment gap.